So, my name is Brianna Dougal, and the vulnerable population that I would like to talk about today is chronic anxiety and depression. So, we'll just get right in and we will talk about the description of each of these different populations. So, anxiety and depression often go hand in hand, even though they are completely different diseases. People who have anxiety at a young age oftentimes experience depression later on in life. But there's no evidence that one causes the other, and oftentimes people experience both. So, anxiety is an excessive anxiety or worry for greater than 6 months, and it happens most days. This can affect a person's health, work, social life, routine, and according to the National Institute of Mental Health. Some of these symptoms can include restlessness, being on edge, fatigue, concentration issues, irritability, muscle tension, and difficulty controlling one's feelings, and often sleep problems. So, what is depression? According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, depression is characterized by at least 5 symptoms, and at least one must be an overwhelming feeling of sadness or a loss of pleasure or interest in things that usually the person enjoys. So, other symptoms include a change in appetite, insomnia or hypersomnia, psychomotor issues, constant fatigue, worthlessness and guilt feelings, thoughts of death and suicide. The person can either have a plan or not have a plan, and then cognitive difficulties, and then usually these symptoms persist for 2 weeks or longer, and it's usually a change in how you're usually feeling. So things to be aware of are social and occupational or educational disturbances like excessive work or school missed, or usual activities are skipped that they normally enjoy going to. And then the reason that anxiety and depression is an at-risk population is because these negative feelings arise. They prevent people suffering from anxiety and depression from doing normal everyday things that could leave them jobless, jeopardize relationships, and lead to demise through drug and alcohol abuse or even death from overdose or suicide. So now we're going to talk about the statistics. So locally, which for me was Salt Lake County, I did the poor mental health in a 30-day span for anxiety. So within Salt Lake County, 18.8% of people suffered poor mental health. And then out of depression, 22.4 percent of people experience depression. So statewide, which is Utah, poor mental health in a 30-day period was 18.2%, and depression was 22.5%. Nationally, so within the United States, 18.8% of people experienced poor mental health, and 19.3% experienced depression. And then internationally, poor mental health experienced in 30 days was 3.8% of people, and depression was a 3.4% of people. So the way that they compare within the Utah and locally and nationally, it was out of 2,000 adults. Internationally, it was out of 100,000 adults. So the Utah population up for poor mental health within a 30-day span, they were asked a question, now thinking about your mental health, which includes stress, depression, and problems with emotions, how many days during the past 30 days was your mental health not good? And that we were slightly lower statewide than locally, so 18.2% for Salt Lake County, and then 18.8% as Utah as a whole, and then also nationally. And then depression was a different story. So the Utah population is much higher in depression at 22.5% compared to the US average, which was 19.3%. And then out of the world, a total of 3.4% of people suffer from depression. So the belief behind this is that Utah has a higher rate of depression is because there's pressure on families. Moms and dads have to work, which put children into stress. There are more mental health needs, but there aren't enough providers here to help fulfill those needs. There are a number of more traumatic brain injuries suffered in Utah, which is a major risk for mental health issues. We do have a high amount of veterans here, and they account for 13% of suicides in Utah. And then postpartum depression is also a huge part of mental instability here in Utah as well. Some contributing factors, so the social determinants of health. While most social determinants of health are contributing risk factors for anxiety and depression, two major ones would be economic stability, like employment, food insecurity, housing instability, and poverty. And then health and healthcare, like access to healthcare and healthcare literacy. So the World Health Organization says that anxiety and depression are subject to human rights violations because of psychosocial disability leading to education and work barriers, which leads to poverty if not controlled. So in a report by Hannah Ritchie and Max Roser, they describe risk factors in mental health communities like medical illnesses, substance use and abuse, cognitive and emotional immaturity, exposure to violence, low income and poverty, failure in school, work stress and unemployment, poor access to basic services, discrimination, and social inequalities. And all of these things fit into social determinants of health. Um, so the next thing are contributing factors. So the National Alliance of Mental Illness, or NAMI, has many different specific concerns. So with anxiety genetics, studies support the evidence for anxiety disorders run in families. And then environmental, stressful or traumatic events such as abuse, death of a loved one, violence, or prolonged illness is often linked to the development of an anxiety disorder. And then within depression, we see even more trauma. When people experience trauma at an early age, it can cause long-term changes in how their brain responds to fear and stress. Genetics, mood disorders such as depression tend to run in families. Brain changes. So imaging studies have shown the frontal lobe of the brain become less active when the person is depressed. And then other medical conditions such as ADHD, chronic pain, anxiety, medical illnesses, and sleep disturbances can play a role in depression. And then drug and alcohol misuse. So 21% of adults with substance use disorder also experience major depressive episodes. So next, I want to talk about the root cause of anxiety and depression. So the World Health Organization actually backs up this root cause of the population of people with chronic anxiety and depression are vulnerable because people around them often don't understand their mental illness, and this causes the population to be misunderstood and discriminated against. So contributing factors based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So met would be physiologically and safety, unmet love and belonging, self-esteem and self-actualization. Anticipated functioning level, I feel that most people are probably in striving for love and belonging, and likely health outcomes depends on the treatment paths if treatment is done at all. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, met and unmet, I would say that people with anxiety and depression are usually able to meet physiological and safety tiers because they have a drive to survive, and then they're striving to meet love and belonging, but it's hard to create uh, stable relationships. As RuPaul states, if you can't love yourself, how are you going to love somebody else? And then obtainable with proper treatment, as long as people are striving to get help, self-actualization and esteem are attainable just like for anybody else. So specific concerns, this population can be at a higher risk of communicable disease because they practice risky behaviors because of inhibition. They're impulsive and they are sensation seeking, which is a trait that's characterized by trying to pursue activities that make them feel good. Specific concerns would be pregnancy, diabetes, stroke, Parkinson's disease, hypothyroidism, hypothyroidism and Huntington's disease, as well as traumatic brain injuries. Most diseases that people with chronic anxiety have came before their mental illness, not because of their mental illness. And then specific healthcare concerns that people have. So the World Data article, Hannah Ritchie and Max Rosa explain in some cultures of self-harm is carried out in often fatal ways through poisoning or self-immolation. Many self-harm activities lead to death, although it is unclear if there was a real intent to die or if it was accidental. Studies suggest that people suffering from depression are 20 times more likely to commit suicide. And in Utah, suicide is the #1 cause of death for the age group between 10 and 24. And then specific concerns when it comes to risk for harm by others is this population is unlikely to hurt others, but they are at serious risk of being hurt by others because of their vulnerabilities. And to mitigate this, the World Health Organization actually suggests that we integrate mental health services into our primary care. Mental health services during and after emergencies would be amazing. Social services should be taught how to recognize mental illnesses because they're dealing with people in housing and poverty situations. And then mental health should be mainstreamed into children's education programs so that they can be aware early. And that is all. Thank you.